This is the quote-unquote keep it real panel. So, we got our peoples up here. So I didn't tell them that, but they already knew that when I asked them to be here. So we'll go down.
That's a compliment.
Well, without further ado, let's say, how about that for a start? I'll go down the line, and if we can have each of the panelists introduce themselves, and really, what's your personal history with cannabis and/or the effects of the war on drugs? You want to start with Armando?
Yeah, my name is Armando Gudiño. I work with the Drug Policy Alliance, one of the nation's, one of the largest drug reform organizations. And at our core, our work is to end the war on drugs, end the prohibition of marijuana, and to address the historic injustices caused by what has undoubtedly become one of the most significant and largest failed policies in the history of this country, both internationally, nationally, and certainly locally. I've been with DPA for about 8 years, and came to them by way of a history of doing work in the drug policy community, marijuana community, dating back to actually to Proposition 215. I've over the years specialized in areas involving Latino demographics, and have more recently been focusing a lot on the impact the war on drugs has had specifically on the Latino community. I specialize on issues of international transnational criminal drug organizations. And as far as my own personal involvement, DPA, we do a lot of work not only in marijuana legal issues, regulation and legalization, but we also focus on criminal justice reforms and harm reduction. For those of you who aren't familiar with harm reduction, it's an area of policy that looks at the direct and collateral consequences of drug use and the application of drug laws. So to give you a very specific example, we're talking about programs like syringe exchange. And one of the things that first brought me to drug policy work is many years ago during my tenure at college, I actually had a girlfriend who accidentally overdosed on drugs. And when I found her that evening, after being woken up in the middle of a night's sleep, I picked her up, dragged her up, and took her to the local hospital, where I subsequently was arrested and charged with her demise, albeit as an accidental overdose. She had been partying with her girlfriends. And I came to learn that in this state at the time, that if you brought somebody into the hospital who had been in an overdose or who was overdosing, you would be charged with that subsequent act. And at the time, the presumption of law was that if she overdosed, well, you were obviously partying with her, so you participated in what ultimately became her demise. So as I sat in jail, my girlfriend passed. So it was one of those realities that hits you. And I'm proud to say that 10, 15 years later, I found myself in a very unique position at DPA then, and where we worked on a landmark piece of legislation called the Good Samaritan Amendment. And what that law basically did was it changed the rules by which you can incarcerate a person for merely helping them during an overdose. And instead of actually arresting a person, we now protect individuals for informing authorities when an overdose is happening. And I'm very proud to say that that is something that I was a part of, considering how I got involved into that particular area of harm reduction. And ironically, we found ourselves, what the biggest challenge was, we had to inform drug users about that law. But anyway, long introduction, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. Sorry for taking up the time.
Thank you. Aide? Yes. Aide Castro, por favor.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Aide Castro. I've been on the Linwood City Council for 11 years now. Thankfully, I'll be done December 2020. Very much looking forward to that. That doesn't pay the bills, so I do have a consultant company that I formed back in 2013. My consultant company, ASM Premier Consultants, started as a government affairs consulting firm. 2015, I have 6 years of legislative experience. I worked 3 years for then Assemblymember Isidore Hall, and 3 years with our current Speaker of the Assembly, Mr. Anthony Rundon. I left his office in March of 2017 so I could focus completely on my consulting firm. But while I was working in his office in 2015, Assemblymember Reggie Jones-Sawyer was working on combining the MRSA and AMA rules here in the state of California, and at the same time, Prop 64 was being developed. So being a city council member, I quickly realized that I had two opportunities. One, the opportunity of economic development with my background in real estate. I immediately saw an opportunity to rejuvenate our manufacturing area that was underutilized, and we weren't really benefiting from the property taxes that we could be benefiting, because a lot of those properties hadn't been touched since like the early 50s or 60s. So we weren't getting the full property tax benefit because they were protected under Prop 13. I knew if the cannabis industry came into our city, they would immediately start buying up these warehouses, and now the city would benefit from the new property tax value at the new purchase sale. So that was my original intent. But my subconscious was reminding me of when I got arrested at, I think I was 21, 22. I was a passenger in a vehicle with some friends that had a lot of cannabis in the car. I had already started consuming. And the reason I started consuming was because I worked at the phone company. It was a National Multilingual Center for GTE back then, now Verizon. I just aged myself. And I developed carpal tunnel and tendonitis. I have a little cyst here on my arm that I never let them remove because they would always tell me, well, it's a 50-50 chance. And the muscle relaxers that they gave me basically made me feel like a zombie, and I couldn't function. So a friend handed me a joint, I took my first drag, and I was the happiest camper ever. And I've been consuming discreetly for a lot of years, but when I said, okay, I'm gonna bring this before my community, I can't be a hypocrite. I have to be honest. I have to tell them, hey, when you say, oh, those people that do marijuana, I would always ask them, so what do you think a person that does marijuana look like? And they would describe, your typical, what we unfairly call a pothead. And then when they would finish, I'd be like, nice to meet you, I'm a pothead and I consume. And they would just be taken aback. They would not know how to react because they could not believe, I think I was the mayor at that time, they could not believe that their mayor was pushing a cannabis ordinance and was telling them, I consume it, and no, you don't get to tell me what I'm going to medicate with because you're all a bunch of hypocrites because I've taken shots of tequila with you. Then everybody would laugh and we would move on with the policy, right? But that's a little bit of my story. Now that I'm here, as I'm transitioning out from being the elected official, the policymaker, now I've found something very important. The cannabis industry needs people to interpret the world of local municipalities, or what I call helping the traditional market become part of the compliant market. They need interpretation. They don't know what a conditional use permit is. They think, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna get a cannabis operating license. Now I have my temporary state approval. Now I can get to working. And I'm like, where's your occupancy certificate? Did you get your inspections done? Did you do this? So I was super happy that Cal OSHA was here today because people don't understand. At the end of the day, you are putting together companies. You are now corporate. You are establishing a major business that's going to give you a lot of economic opportunities. And as an elected official, I would not ever deny being a politician. I am a proud politician. There's two types of public servants. There's your diplomat and the politician. The diplomat will do a bunch of research and won't make a decision to save their own life. Then there's the politician. We'll do the research, make a decision, roll up our sleeves and get it done because we only care about keeping 50 plus one of the people happy because it's a democratic system. So I took that attitude, pushed it through my city, and when they were talking about 5-6% taxation, I said, are you crazy? You're setting up these people to fail. If our intent is to create revenue for our cities, why are you overtaxing them? Do you not remember being a small business owner yourself? Do you not realize everything that it entails? Workers' comp, insurance, training, the investment of the build-out. So the best I was able to do was 2.5% and 2%. I think I did pretty good based on the fact that we got ours approved in 2016. The city of Linwood was the first city that was able to get an operator to receive the first temporary manufacturing permit from the state of California. And I'm proud to say that we were able to recruit good, reputable brands to our city. And that's my story, and I'm very excited to be here.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Virgil Grant. Been involved in the industry since the beginning. Like a lot of my colleagues that have been in the industry from day one, we predate legalization. So you guys that know that, I mean, you know, that have been there, understand that. Measure M was my creation in the city of Los Angeles. Social equity wouldn't exist if it wasn't for me. There was a need to speak up, what about us? And no one was speaking up towards that. A lot of us that come from the pre-ICO era, you know, we kind of checked the box and said it's done, it's made, it's over with. And it's not done, it's not made, and it's not over with. Even now, we're still continuing the fight. But nonetheless, Measure M is something I can hang my hat on. Social equity is something I can go down in history with. I've always been an industry player, fighter, advocate, owner-operator. I own 3 pre-ICOs, micro businesses in the city of Los Angeles, also a Phase 2 applicant, and pushing to help Phase 3 go through as smooth as possible. I know a lot of people are waiting for Phase 3 to come in and are unfamiliar with what it's going to look like in the city of Los Angeles, but the only thing I can say is be patient. You know, and people are saying, you know, we've been patient enough, but you have to understand, this is the 5th largest financial power in the world, LA. And that wasn't done overnight. So you can't expect Phase 3 to get done overnight. Be patient, it's coming, and it will roll out. There are going to be 200 licenses given under Phase 3. So I want you guys to be very aware of that. And please, people of color, I kick the door open for you. And the people that back my play on that, we kick the door open for you. Take full advantage of it. So that's what I've done.
You know, they can only kick in the door, but it's up to us to get on up in there, right? So thank you for that, and thank you for everyone and their stories. You know, as you see, cannabis is something that's personal. It's unlike any other industry. This is something that comes from the heart, especially this panel here, and as we talk about social justice, the war on drugs and the effects. You know, it's hard to talk about cannabis and not talk about the effects of the war on drug and what it's played to, what it's done to its culture, to us, you know, the stigma that we've all had to live with now that we can kind of come free, right? You know, I would sit here and tell you the time I've got arrested, but we might just be here too long. So, you know, it's just one of the many, right? But more so, you know, thank God I have nothing too major. But, you know, the fact that we've always had to deal with this, whether it's an official record or even in your own household or in your workplace or in your life, you know, I always, you know, Latinos, you know, some of our cultures and some of our minority cultures, you know, there's some stigma that we're still fighting and really need to work on with defining certain cultures. So for us, you know, it's always been, go, you know, don't be one of those marihuaneros smoking in the corner, but go grab me a chela. You know, it's like, okay, a beer for those of you. So not Coach Chela out there. So with that, you know, it's really a personal thing, and for all of us, including myself, you know, I have an organization called Collective Strategies, and what we're doing is really about access, inclusion, and diversity into all work and business opportunities. Those not just jobs, but really careers. As we look, you know, I was fortunate to work in the city, the mayor's office, and representing the community for over 15 years in nonprofit work. And really see what the community needs. And at the end of the day, if we ain't getting the jobs or the careers that really matter, we're not becoming the owners, you know, we're always going to be servant to the masters. So for us, it's about us becoming those owners, taking this opportunity now that it's here in front of us, and, you know, not having any regrets. You know, no one needs to invite us. We created this table for all of you guys and for people like us to be here and unite. And we're bringing everybody, you know, black, brown, white, women, formerly incarcerated. That's the work we want to do. And at the end of the day, that's what cannabis is about. And that's why I love it. And that's why we're here, proud now to say that we consume, and we're here learning about all the opportunities. So with that, why don't we maybe go backwards and talk a little bit more about, I'm saying reverse order here, but the next question is what are these efforts? So you touched on Virgil, phase 3. Why don't we talk a little bit more about what's going on with phase 3, and more so what type of work you may be doing or what you're pushing for the city to do, especially around, you know, that economic opportunity and that social justice aspect.
So right now we're fighting for money to be handed to phase 3. You know, there's $10 million. And of course, you have now all of a sudden, I think about 7 to almost 8 counties that are trying to reach for that money. And this is, keep in mind, this is social equity money. Like, who was talking about social equity? LA, Oakland, and then, you know, when you look at LA, now you have other counties that are reaching for it. Rio Dale, have you guys ever heard of Rio Dale? Maybe those that are from Northern California, you can run through Rio Dale in about 2 minutes. And they're talking about a social equity program. So, you know, I feel that it's my responsibility as someone who brought this conversation to light and then stayed very connected to the crafting of this policy, and also the money which came from Prop 64 via Alice Huffman, the head of the NAACP, who really fought hard as well for that $10 million to come down, because she was connected with the Governor Brown at the time. And so that's, right now we're making sure the money goes where the money needs to. You have to keep in mind right now, LA holds the most licenses in the whole country. So if the money goes anywhere, it needs to go where there's more licensing. So phase 3 will roll out. Of course, there was a lot of talk about whether it would be merit-based, lotto, or first come, first serve. So there was a proposal for a lotto and a merit-based, and I myself, which everybody else did as well, spoke against both merit-based and lotto, because they do not work. It's first come, first serve. You get in line, you put your application in. If your application is correct and everything is, your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted, then God bless you. You know, you get your license. We know lottos are rigged. You could look at Long Beach, you could look at Orange County, and you can see who got majority of those licenses. And it was one person that got the majority of the licenses in Long Beach and in Orange County. So we know lotto doesn't work. Merit-based will kill a lot of us. And the reason why is because then when I talked about social equity, my main thing was barriers to entry. Merit-based becomes a barrier to entry, and it becomes a huge barrier to entry. So that was the reason why I shot down merit-based, and I'm sure a lot of people that was in the same room with me that shot down merit-based, that was the reason behind that. So we got it first come, first served. The first 100 licenses that'll be released, because keep in mind, you can apply for 3 retails under this social equity, but you only get 1 out of the first 100. And then when the second 100 is released, then you'll be able to apply for those other 2. So it'll be the first 100 that'll come off. Once those first 100 are gone through, then the other 100 will be released. Now, that one after another is not etched in stone. There is, I think on Monday, if I'm not mistaken, a Rules Committee coming out. I have to double check on that. But there are some new proposals from City Council. This is a car that's moving. And it's always moving and taking turns every day. So you have to stay in tune. If you are very interested in becoming a Phase 3 applicant, you want to, pay attention to what LA is doing. Go on to the DCR website, put your email in, get on their mailing list so that you can receive email updates, because you will get the updates as meetings are coming out for council. So that's what Phase 3 looks like. In order to qualify, there's basically Tier 1 and Tier 2. Tier 1 is people that have felony convictions or misdemeanor, any type of cannabis conviction on their record, nonviolent. Tier 2 would be the impact zones. If you live in the impact zone, or if you are low income and live in the impact zone, that's Tier 2. Those are the qualifications for a social equity applicant. When I created social equity, the first thing I stayed away from was race. And the reason for that is because I knew that I would receive litigation from those who didn't consider themselves minority. And so in order for us not to have a community that had been negatively impacted, then therefore negatively impacted one more time through litigation and holding up these licenses from being released, I didn't mention race once in social equity. So if you live in Humboldt County, Southern Humboldt, which was one of the hardest hit communities up in Northern California by the failed war on drugs, then you qualify for social equity. So keep in mind, this is a statewide program. It's no longer just LA, Oakland, Sacramento. It is now a California state program. But this was the reasoning behind that. So if you were a white person and you lived in Compton and you were hit by the failed war on drugs, then yes, indeed, you qualify for social equity. So I like to always be clear about that. But when you look at the impact zones, we know where the failed war on drugs hit the most. South LA, East LA, and areas of the valley, and other communities that I probably can't name offhand, but they are designated, and they have those designated zones, and you can look at on the DCR website and pull that information off of there. So if you live in the impact zone and you are low income, then you qualify, as I say, for second tier social equity. That's pretty much what qualifications you will need. It's pretty simple. It's nothing difficult. Of course, you would like to have your location. Of course, you would like to make sure that you are well-funded. Because one thing that I always say is that I didn't think and create social equity as a welfare program. It's not that. It's an opportunity that we would not have otherwise gotten to equally participate in the cannabis industry if you had a felony conviction. Because prior to this, if you were a felon, you couldn't even work inside the cannabis industry at all, not even dump the trash can, mop the floor, any of that. And so, of course, where I come from, I grew up in the city of Compton, and I know that did not exist. I could not let that happen because of the community of where I came from. I grew up in Compton, but I went to school in Linwood, and so I was a part of that community as well. Graduated from Linwood High. And the same exists in Linwood's community. There are felons that have cannabis crimes. I also did 6 years in federal prison for owning and operating the same 3 licensed cannabis facilities that the state and the city licensed me in today. Go figure that.
Full circle there.
So, thank you. So when I came home, the only thing was on my mind is what about us? What about those 51% of the people that were sitting in prison for nonviolent cannabis felonies? And I knew that once they got out, they wouldn't be able to play in the industry that they helped create. Because keep in mind, if it wasn't for the street hustler and the cat up in the backwoods in Humboldt growing that weed, and us going up there and bringing it down to LA, Compton, Watts, it wouldn't be no industry. There wouldn't be an industry for the people to take advantage of to this day.
Thank you, Virgil.
So I'm always saying, what about us? Who thinks about us? Well, I tell you, I did.
There you go.
And here's social equity.
Thank you, Virgil. Aide, I know you're doing some great work as well with corporate responsibility and some of the work you're doing as a licensee and brand. So I don't know, anything you want to add regarding the work that's going on regarding the need for corporate responsibility or some of the other programs or things that we need to do to make sure we get a piece?
Mr. Grant said something very, very important. He didn't create social equity as a welfare program. It's an opportunity program. So this is the opportunity for us, individuals, including us up here, we understand you, that we're victims of the prohibition of cannabis in our communities. It's our opportunity to do business in an industry that damaged our communities. But how do we do that? Unfortunately, one of the reasons our communities fall victim to these types of things is because, one, we're not properly informed. We don't even know the basics of Government 101. And two, more importantly, when we do think of being the entrepreneur and being the business owner, we do it with the mentality of an employee and not that of a boss. We're not thinking like bosses. We're not putting together business plans. We're not thinking things through. We're looking for shortcuts. That's what I've experienced in my community, not just with the cannabis industry, but all small business owners. And a lot of it has to do because of the overregulation and our lack of involvement in our local governments. Now, I'm lucky. I'm part of a local government that's very small. We're only 4.9 square miles, and there's only 5 council members. So it's easy for me to convince 4 other council members or maybe make fun of them behind the scenes and tell them, if you don't support this, I'm going to start, because I'm known for putting people on blast on the dais. I had one colleague that was opposed it. The other 4 completely stood behind me. One of them was the pastor. So the people who were opposing it started protesting outside his church, coming to the council meeting and attacking him. And I told him, Mr. Hernandez, and I said, I know this is probably going to be embarrassing to you and difficult because of your church, but I need you to do me a favor. I need you to tell them why. So he finally said it. He says, this goes against my religion, everything that I preach in the church. But when my brother died of AIDS and cannabis was his only relief, I knew that I couldn't oppose it. So I said, what do you need me to do? How do you need me to do it? So him and I when our other colleagues were making decisions based on self-preservation, what looked good, what story, headline was gonna look good, what they needed to be worried about, being reelected or not being reelected. One of them was a former school board member, and he was like, oh no, I represented the schools for 10 years, how could I do this? So I say all this to you guys because the main reason for the misconception of the cannabis industry, or what your typical consumer is, or who is a social equity individual, the misconception is there because we're not taking the time to, one, educate ourselves and educate other people. So I was very lucky enough to receive a social equity license with my partners for cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution in phase 2. We're not operating because even though we do have a temporary operating permit, my partners got all excited and they're like, yeah, let's rock and roll. And I'm like, nope, I'm here to keep you compliant. So they didn't like it, but now they're happy because when the BCC started doing some inspections, they were like, wow, you saved us. So why do I point that out to you guys? Yes, it's gonna be expensive to do it the right way, but it's gonna save you so much money in the long run. It's important that you take the time to find professionals. Why do I say that? Especially in my community. We have this tendency to talk to the neighbor or the comadre, and whatever the neighbor or the comadre recommends it to, whatever attorney, which you end up finding out was really a notary, but because they call them a licenciado, and that means attorney in Spanish, you're like, yeah, licenciado, and next thing you know, you just got, fraud, because your money was taken, you were miseducated, misinformed, and you went and took the wrong decision. So please do not do what your compadre or your neighbor is telling you to do. Do not take advice from the trapper. You guys know what I'm talking about. You need to decide either you're gonna keep on trapping or you're gonna do this right. Because if you're trapping out and trying to do this compliant, you are part of the problem. You're the reason. And all you're doing is damaging your own opportunity. Once you start a legitimate business and you give people employment, they're depending on you. And the beauty of the industry now being legalized is that now we can put them on payroll. Now, if for whatever reason we need to lay them off, they qualify for unemployment. Whereas before they didn't have these opportunities. So what I would like to offer to you guys, it's not always about making money. Yes, I'm gonna go be an entrepreneur and I'm gonna be part of this cannabis industry very proudly. But at the same time, I wanna be a resource to you. I wanna help as many other females be part of this industry. Gentlemen, I'll help you too, because at the end of the day, I know your woman is the boss, and I'll just talk to her and give her direction so that you don't forget I'm playing. But at the end of the day, it's about really, truly, if we're really going to help each other, we need to learn how to share our resources, come together as associations. When you do join an association, be careful that they actually understand the politics, because I'm also seeing associations not understanding the politics. I'll give you an example. The Linwood Cannabis Association. They have development agreements with 10 years. Why would you agree to that? Who receives a development agreement with a time limitation? So I told them, go and lobby to get that amended. Well, they got more concerned with whether or not they can transfer it and selling it and all that. By the time it got to council, the original intent to amend the ordinance never happened, because at the same time, there was a re-election going on in my city. And then guess what? The politicians start treating you like ATM machines. You don't know any better. You start handing over contributions thinking, yeah, I'm in. And guess what? You were just taken for a ride. And I'm speaking to you as a politician. That was one thing that I was very proud to say, that I took absolutely no money from any of the 19 operators in my city. I even closed my campaign account. I'm termed out. I don't need to fundraise anymore. So you didn't need to wine and dine me. I'm just here as a resource. My goal is to make sure I can assist every single one of you guys as much as possible with whatever free information I can give you as to how to run your businesses like a legitimate corporate entity, so that you could create and leave a legacy for your families and go back into your communities and reinvest that money in your communities, please. Thank you.
Armando? You wanna-
Thank you. As the perhaps the only person who's not directly involved in the industry, it's funny. They brought up something about how there's a lot of folks today navigating, including the charlatans in the industry, and I thought of something that I need to share. Several years ago, 5, 6 years ago, I found myself debating somebody on national television. And this was during, I think it was 2014. And that person was in the opposition against marijuana legalization. This is right around Colorado. And of course, I was in the affirmative. And late last year, an old colleague of mine who had abandoned us in the world of policy and went into the private sector to work in the cannabis industry calls me up and he says, hey, listen, I want to ask you about somebody whom I'm about to hire as a consultant to help me navigate my political, challenges. And I said, sure, who is it? And at the time he mentioned the name and it didn't ring a bell. And he says, well, he says he knows you and that he's worked with you. Well, guess what? The guy who I debated in 2014 had now turned into a consultant for the marijuana industry. But it goes to show you just, how much this industry has evolved. I think it's important that, I think they've brought up some really key important issues. I want to bring it back a little bit. The reason I put all this stuff out here because, we at DPA, we're not tied to the industry as some of my colleagues up here are. We like to say we're the folks who don't give a rat's ass about marijuana. We're the folks who are very interested in seeing this develop, and we're also the people who are intimately involved in marijuana, right? So we're against, we're on the left, in the middle, and on the right. And because as policy folks, we try and ultimately develop good, responsible policy. And we feel that before there was social equity as we know it today relative to this particular conversation around your interest in this industry, I think social equity existed, and from where I would argue the foundations of this came from was the struggle for social justice in this industry. And that's very, very important to note, because while we might have not called this social equity, we were talking about social justice and the war on drugs. And, it's important that you guys take note. We keep track of numbers and records. One of the last times we followed up on the status of what the war on drugs did by 2012, 2014, we were still arresting 1.5 million people for drug law violations in this country, of which 749,000 were arrested for marijuana violations, of which, ladies and gentlemen, 88% was for possession of marijuana. That's only 4 or 5 years ago, folks. And a lot of this is not over. So while there is something to be said and feel good about, and I'm not necessarily digging on the social equity as a whole, I think it becomes very important that we remember that this fight is far from over. Just as many of you are seeking opportunities today to be included in this industry, don't lose sight of the fact that there's a lot of challenges that are coming up your way, not just only on the financial and the business side of it, but really at the ultimate, on the overall societal side of it. This country invests somewhere in the area of $50 billion a year fighting the war on drugs, $25 billion of which comes from federal funding, $25 billion of which comes from local and regional funding. And what has that done? Has made us the #1 country that most incarcerates people in the world. And you know what, ladies and gentlemen? That #1 is mostly attributed to the incarceration of Black and Latino people in this country. Okay? So it is important to keep that in context. And the reason I say this is that when we first started, look, when we first legalized medical marijuana, Proposition 215, months ahead of what we knew was going to be the passage of that proposition, we went to legislators and said, hey, get ahead of the 8 ball on this one. This is going to pass. All the polls are telling us this is going to be successful. And nobody wanted to touch it. And this is why we saw a de facto legal system with no regulatory framework up until what, 2015? 20 years, roughly, went by. And then on the eve of what we now again saw, the polling all told us that in 2016, Proposition 64 was going to pass. Many still didn't act. A lot of legislators didn't act. Many of them didn't even want to engage us on a conversation. I was part of the team that helped with the proposition in 2010 that failed. And back then, we were having conversations about reparative justice within the marijuana industry. I can tell you of conversations in which we were stuck in a room in Berkeley, California, working on some of the drafting of some of this language, and a very particular incident in which myself and a couple of colleagues went up there in a room full of attorneys, mostly white, and I jokingly said, and what are we going to do about drug users and drug dealers? Because they're the number one most equipped at this point to participate in the market. And you know what somebody said? Are you saying that drug dealers should have access to be a part of the industry? Abso-fucking-lutely. You think? Believe it or not, there was a significant push, right? So today, ladies and gentlemen, we at the Drug Policy Alliance, this is just my marijuana portfolio. This big-ass stack of fucking headache, really is what you want to call it. I'm going to tell you why. We are currently monitoring 100+ legislative bills in the California Legislature, both on the Senate and on the Assembly, that have a direct impact on the drug policy of this state. 100+, of which we know 58 include the language of marijuana. You might have already heard this. I don't know. I wasn't here earlier. Maybe in the legal panel. Of which 12, maybe depending on how you argue it, 14, I argue, actually could literally impact everyone here seeking and those that already have licenses. So when you put it in that perspective, it's important, and I just, again, I want to remind you guys that as you navigate forward, even in the context of some of these discussion issues around social equity, it is far from over. It is imperative that you keep your eye on what has happened legislatively. That when you do seek out counsel or advice from individuals who come to you and say, I am a consultant, I am an advisor, I am a licenciado, which is not an attorney, that this cat understands the 100+ legislative bills. And the reason I say this is because although I'm saying 100+ drug policy and only 58, 60, 62 maybe that are using marijuana directly, guess what? The remaining 40 are also in part a part of the ancillary system of marijuana. There is one, and I'll give you one specific example, and I'm not going to go into the specific bill because quite frankly, we ourselves are still debating this issue. There's one bill in particular that right now, if it were to pass tomorrow, would remove the provisions that myself and some of my colleagues fought adamantly to regulate how many dispensaries can be in a particular community. Why is that problematic? When we went into this, those of us that have been fighting the social justice issues, the last fucking thing we were going to sit by and allow to happen is another proliferation in communities of color where outside interests come in and develop businesses similar to the way in which liquor stores did in communities of color that have devastated our communities. No. So the problem, though, is 2-3 years later, here we have already one effort to dismantle that. Right now, the Bureau can limit how many dispensaries when they deem it over concentration. There's one bill that says we want to remove that and allow a local agency a local government to determine that. We also right now, already in the last 3 years, have established and determined that there is more than 24 incidents of accusations, allegations, investigations, and convictions for elected officials who have taken money, briberies, and others by the marijuana industry. So put that in context. Or 40 years we've been fighting this fucking war on drugs. And just because we regulate it and just because we're about to venture into opportunities for us, don't lose sight of the fact that we're still in the crosshairs and we're still being prosecuted.
Thank you. Wow. Well, everybody, round of applause for everybody. As I said, it's keeping it real. They lack no passion. Thank you guys all for coming. They'll be around. We can get their information. We'll jump on to the next panel. Thank you once again.